Oil tankers under attack. Washington threatens Tehran with military action after 2 ships were targeted in the Gulf of Oman. I'm Imran Garta, and today on the Newsmakers we ask, is Iran trying to provoke a war with the United States? Both Washington and Tehran say they don't want to go to war, but if it came to a military confrontation, neither side may be willing to back down. Relations between the two look to be improving under former President Barack Obama. But since Donald Trump took office, that relationship has soured. The president withdrew from a historic nuclear deal, undoing years of diplomacy, and reinstated sanctions, sending the Iranian economy into a tailspin. Now Iran's Atomic Energy Agency says it's quadrupling its production of enriched uranium and is on track to break internationally agreed limits in the coming days. So, is Tehran intentionally provoking the US, or are the Americans looking for any excuse to challenge Iran? That debate in a moment, but first this report by Natalie Perhonen.
It is the assessment of the United States government that the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman.
There were no serious injuries when 2 commercial tankers were attacked last week. But the explosions have sent political waves through the region. This waterway in the Gulf is a vital channel for global oil and gas shipments. The US released this video, which it says shows members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard pulling up alongside one of the ships to remove an unexploded mine. The UK and Saudi Arabia have also blamed Iran for the attacks. Tehran denies any involvement. Instead, it's accused the US of waging what it calls an Iranophobic campaign. The US says it doesn't want to go to war with Iran, but it also hasn't ruled out the possibility of military action. Tensions are building at the same time that Iran is scaling back its compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran says it will surpass the limit of its enriched uranium stockpiles allowed under the agreement. The US withdrew from the deal known as the JCPOA last year and has reimposed sanctions on Tehran. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has put the other signatories on notice.
جمهوری اسلامی ایران در چارچوب ظرفیت‌های برجام از اعضای باقی مانده در این توافق می‌خواهد هرچه سریعتر به تعهدات خود در بهره‌مندی جمهوری اسلامی ایران از منافع اقتصادی این توافق عمل نمایند.
Iran is lashing out because the regime wants our successful maximum pressure campaign lifted. No economic sanctions entitle the Islamic Republic to attack innocent civilians, disrupt global oil markets, and engage in nuclear blackmail.
The waters in the Gulf are calm for now, but both sides have shown they're capable of ratcheting up the rhetoric. Natalie Perhonen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now on set is Borzu Daragahi. He's a correspondent with The Independent and a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council focusing on the Middle East. Mohammed Marandi is a professor at Tehran University. And in Washington, D.C. is Jim Phillips. He's a senior research fellow for Middle Eastern Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Borzu, those 2 oil tankers were attacked. Did Iran do it?
I mean, we don't know with 100% certainty, but it's very likely. I mean, Iran has the means and the motive. There's still a lot of unanswered questions. If I was a government official, I would be looking into it. But as an analyst, looking at patterns throughout the region over the course of history and looking at the current situation in the Middle East with the Trump administration really backing Iran into a corner, it would make sense logically. Of course, we still have to wait to see what the investigation says, but very likely this was an attack perpetrated by Iran.
Mohammed Marandi, Iran backed into a corner, so it finds a way to retaliate. Do you accept that?
Well, the reality on the ground is that there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever to show that the attack was carried out by Iran. The first attack that we had about a month ago alongside Fujairah, the United Arab Emirates port, was carried out literally a day after Bolton claimed that the Israelis gave him intelligence that the Iranians were about to carry out some sort of attack, and then, which was very convenient. And then, in this case, the attack took place literally an hour or two before the Japanese Prime Minister was supposed to meet the leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and both ships were linked to the Japanese. So that's pretty strange. I don't see why, when the leader himself said the relationship between the two countries is good, that such a thing would happen. And then also we have the inconsistencies in the American story. On the one hand, the Americans say that mines were used. They gave this very vague clip that doesn't really show anything. And then the owner of the ship says that mines were not used and that it came from the air. And then the Americans had this another version of the story where they said two Iranian ships were swiftly moving towards these ships before the explosion. But if a mine was attached to the ships, why would ships be moving towards them? And of course, the mine would be under the water, not above the water.
Okay.
So
you're
the U.S.
hanging
story
a big question mark over this. Okay.
is inconsistent.
Okay. Jim Phillips. It's not just Mohammed Marandi saying this. As he quoted the Japanese owner of the ship saying the people on the boat believed that they were hit by flying objects. We've also got the German foreign minister saying, sure, there's a video, but the video is not enough. Do you accept that there's enough in there to be skeptical of the claims of Secretary Pompeo and others?
Yeah, I would agree that the video by itself is not a smoking gun, but it's the handle of the gun is warm, and there could be other evidence out there. We'll see. The U.S. is declassifying other evidence that could be brought forward. But I think this is Iran reacting to the maximum pressure campaign of the Trump administration with a maximum blackmail campaign, not only on the oil front with these mysterious explosions, now 2 incidents off the shore of UAE. We have the continuous attacks on the Saudi East-West pipeline by Iran's allies or surrogates, the Houthi rebels. I think those are signals from Iran that if it can't get its oil out, that other countries are going to have trouble getting their oil out. And all of this noise on the oil front really masks, I think, what is the most important issue, which is the nuclear issue now that Iran is ramping up its uranium enrichment program again. I think that's essentially nuclear blackmail,
right.
Primarily focused on the EU.
Just for a second, to what end? Does Iran actually want war, or is it just trying to keep America busy for a little while? What does it actually want out of this, if it's doing it?
I don't think it wants war. I think it's trying to use salami tactics, to use deniable acts that will keep the oil market disrupted, but make Iran's point. I think at some point, Iran will be forced into negotiations with the U.S., and as part of those negotiations, Iran wants it to be known that it has not only its leverage on the nuclear front, but leverage on the international energy front.
Borza?
I mean, I would just say that it sort of underscores, this whole thing underscores the incoherence and mendacity of the Trump administration vis-a-vis Iran. They promised that putting these maximum pressure sanctions on Iran would defang the tiger, so to speak, and get Iran into the negotiating room, and it would reduce Iran's ability to quote-unquote fund terror and so on. Meanwhile, in the same breath, they're saying, look at what Iran is doing. They're attacking these tankers. They're arming the Houthis. And in addition, Pompeo even accused Iran of being behind an attack in Afghanistan that the Taliban had claimed on U.S. soldiers. So on the one hand, they're saying that our strategy is working. On the other hand, they're not even able to convince their own NATO allies that they of any of the veracity of their claims. Even the Europeans have doubts about the claims because they've been so dishonest about everything. And on the other hand, none of the things that they said that the maximum pressure would accomplish have been accomplished. Iran has gone from a certain level of nuclear-enriched fuel to a higher level because of the maximum pressure campaign. It's actually the opposite of what the maximum pressure campaign was supposed to achieve. I would love to hear what Mr. Phillips has to say
So
about
we
that.
have the Iranian Atomic Agency spokesman saying that the country will break its uranium stockpile limits set by the JCPOA, and within 10 days it's going to go and spin more uranium to get to another level. Doesn't mean there's a bomb or anything, but it's spinning more uranium.
It's reactor-grade fuel.
It's reactor-grade fuel. Mohammed Marandi, doesn't it make more sense that Iran is probably doing this because, if you look at the Trump administration, it quit the nuclear deal. It listed the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization. It's squeezing the Iranians on all fronts, and the sanctions are crippling. Trump doesn't want any sort of decent relationship with the Iranians. So, you know the system better than we do. The Iranians are messing with the Americans for this moment in time. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Well, again, we have to see who has the motive for violence and war. We know that Netanyahu, Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed of the UAE, and Bolton and perhaps Pompeo are gunning for war. And we have their statements, we have their archive statements. So they're the ones who have the motive. And therefore, there's no reason not to believe that they weren't behind it. More importantly, I think it's important for your viewers to remember the 2003 presentation by Colin Powell in the UN Security Council, where he presented false information, fabricated information to justify a U.S. attack on Iraq. And we all knew even then that the United States was lying. And it turned out, obviously, that later on what we all knew was a fact. So the United States intelligence doesn't mean anything to many of us. And when they show footage or when they say our intelligence says this doesn't mean anything because we know what they've done in the past. So the motive, obviously, people like Netanyahu have a motive. The history of U.S. intelligence is, as I stated. So I don't think it's we should be so quick to go and accuse the Iranians. But I'd like to add one point, just one point. And that is that when it comes to blackmail that your American guest said, who is blackmailing who? The Americans are waging economic warfare, economic terrorism against the Iranian people. They're trying to strangle the Iranian economy. They're trying to make people suffer. And people have died as a result because of, for example, certain medicines have been unavailable, imported medicines and that sort of thing for cancer patients. So and of course the Iranians, the reason why they're restarting part of the nuclear program is because the Iranians are the only party that are abiding by the nuclear deal. The United States and the Europeans are in complete violation of the deal. So how is Iran blackmailing the United States? It is the United States that is behaving like a godfather.
Jim Phillips, you're never going to live 2003 down, and this is not the first time this has been brought up on this particular program, not only by Iranian guests, Russian guests, and others as well. Colin Powell had a slam dunk case, and sorry for you guys, but no amount of alleged evidence that you produce, we're always going to be reminded of the build-up to the Iraq war. So when Pompeo says there's no doubt and Adam Schiff says there's no doubt that the Iranians were behind it, do you accept that people like Mr. Marandi are going to turn back to the history books and say, well, we've seen this movie before and you lied and you just want a pretext to war? Do you accept that?
No, I don't accept that. I would remind Mr. Marandi that more than 3,000 chemical weapon shells were found in Iraq. Some of them were used by ISIS to set off chemical bombs. These were weapons that were built before the 1991 Gulf War, so the Bush administration did not make a big deal about finding them. But under the terms of the armistice that ended the 1991 Gulf War, Saddam Hussein was obliged to destroy those chemical weapons. He didn't do it. He also didn't destroy his missiles that had longer ranges than, I think it was 150 kilometers.
I don't know if we want to go down this rabbit hole of whether there were actually weapons of mass destruction. Can we at least accept as a fundamental basis that there were no WMDs in Iraq? Even Bush himself admitted afterwards.
There were chemical weapons in Iraq which would qualify as WMDs, but they
not
were
to
built
the extent that was
not to the extent
that was expressed by the administration in the build-up to war.
Let's be clear here. These are like splitting hairs. I mean, there was also chemical weapons found in Gaddafi's Libya that were supposed. He didn't even know about them himself.
Right. But Jim, there was no yellow cake uranium. It didn't happen.
It was not the nuclear and biological programs that the administration expected to be there were not there, but there were substantial chemical weapons and
okay, to the point, Jim. To the point, Jim. Mohammed Marandi is saying the Americans can't be trusted because we've seen this movie before. They lied to us in the past. They're doing the same with Iran. Address that directly.
Well, I think that the Iranians are not exactly a paragon of truth when it comes to even talking about their own nuclear program. The need to build uranium enrichment facilities under mountains illegally without declaring them first. The nuclear archive, which showed that Iran had plans to build 5 nuclear weapons and test them. Iran still has not explained that. And by the way, it was required to come clean on its nuclear weapon program before the signing of the deal. The IAEA has recognized that it did not do that, and for that reason, it cannot give Iran a clean nuclear bill of health. So, you know, I think the Iranian government does not have a reputation for telling the truth when it comes to assassinating its own exiles in Europe, for example.
Borzo Dargahi, is that a fair point, that the Iranians are also all smoke and mirrors?
I think every single government in this part of the world deserves a lot of scrutiny and is, you know, full of mendacity and dishonesty and recklessness. So, I mean, I wouldn't put the Iranians on any kind of pedestal. I wouldn't put the Saudis on any kind of pedestal. I don't think that everything is Iraq. I don't think we need to go back to Iraq to sort of re-look at everything in the world from the point of view of Iraq. The bottom line is, yes, Iran had a nuclear program. It was strongly, strongly suspected that until 2003 that this was a clandestine weapons program.
Right.
And then in 2015, the world came up with a modus vivendi about the Iranian nuclear program. It came up with a solution that would allow Iran to sustain its nuclear ambitions on a civilian scale. And then the Trump administration torpedoed that deal. And it made all sorts of promises about what would come about because of that. And none of those promises have come about. And in addition to that, we're going in the opposite direction, back towards that chaotic time from the 2003 to 2013-14, when the Iran and the U.S. were basically in an undeclared war.
Chaotic, might it actually lead to war? When we're hearing Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, Representative Adam Kinzinger from Illinois, when we're hearing them essentially say, now, okay, they're not part of the war room, they're not decision-making.
But John Bolton is.
John Bolton is.
Absolutely.
And so they're saying stuff like, hey, we can strike them, they're weak. Bolton believes that as well. Does that mean that this administration truly, deep down, is considering going to war with Iran?
I'm sure that they are considering it, but I don't think that Trump wants it. To him, it's a domestic thing. It's a way for him to get people like the Heritage Foundation to support him. It's a way for him to get donations and various types of political support by being tough on Iran. But I don't think an actual war would benefit him politically. He knows that. It's not one of his goals is to have a war with Iran, but could the United States and Iran stumble accidentally into a war? Absolutely.
Mohammed Marandi, are the Iranians seeing this and these comments from the U.S. administration, never mind the aircraft carriers on your doorstep and so on? with the comments over the past few days, are they considering these as potential declarations of war?
Well, first let me respond to a couple of points, and then I'll get to that very quickly. One is that the Iranian nuclear program, there's never been any proof to show that at any point it had a weapons dimension, and the IAEA says that clearly. Anyone can go to the IAEA website and find that information. Those are American accusations. There's never been any evidence, and the IAEA has declared repeatedly that Iran's nuclear program is the most open and the most accessible in the whole world as we speak. So this whole story about 5 nuclear weapons, that's just fabricated information. Anyone can check on the website. 2, the point to make that countries in this region, many of their actions are questionable. I would say the most questionable are Western countries. The United States, Iran has not destroyed Libya. Iran has not destroyed Syria with extremists. Iran did not destroy Afghanistan. Okay. Iran did not invade Iraq. Iran is not making the people in Yemen.
Mr. Marandi, the point that was made was that everybody's
Venezuela.
Terrible. So everybody's terrible. That was the point that was being made.
I'm saying that the real terror is those who are threatening other countries like the United States, which is imposing war on ordinary Iranians. But to get back to the point that you made, no, I don't think the Iranians feel that any sane person in the United States is after war, because I think the Americans know quite well that the Persian Gulf region is very vulnerable. The oil and gas assets and installations in the Persian Gulf region, as well as the ships and the tankers, they will be destroyed in any war. And it's not, the Strait of Hormuz would be a sideshow. So you would have the assets destroyed, especially any country that aids the United States in attacking Iran. Everything that they have would be a legitimate target. So you would have basically 20 million barrels of oil and a lot of gas off the market for a very long period of time. Saudi Arabia and the Emirates would not last long. They are completely dependent.
But certainly every single war is terrible.
And then you'd have millions of people moving to Europe.
Certainly. But every single war is terrible and has terrible consequences. That doesn't mean that countries haven't been sleepwalking into these over the preceding
That is not impossible.
Years and decades.
But what I'm saying is that there are people in the United States who are sane enough to recognize that.
Jim Phillips, Senator Tom Cotton, and this was, this statement really jumped out at me because he's a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and that adds a certain weight to what he said. When he told CBS, and I'm going to quote him here, "These unprovoked attacks on commercial shipping warrant a retaliatory military strike against the Islamic Republic of Iran." Is Senator Cotton naive, or do you agree with him?
Well, I don't think he's naive. He graduated from Harvard and spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I think he's stating a position that attacking international shipping is a threat to international security, and that could warrant in the future some kind of military response, just as Iran's tanker war in the 1980s warranted an international response by the U.S. and other allies in reflagging Kuwaiti tankers and escorting them through. But I'll say this, I don't recall any Americans chanting for death to Iran like occurs on a daily basis, encouraged by the regime. So I don't see the U.S. spoiling for a war with Iran.
Okay.
The United States has threatened to destroy Iran. The U.S. president has threatened to end Iran. So I think your guess should go and check his president's Twitter account, because he's speaking nonsense, obviously.
And you should see what he said in that statement.
Who has the motive for violence. Those who are making these statements, those who are using these attacks, whoever carried them out, are using these as a pretext to advocate violence. So that, in fact, what he is doing is he's showing who has the motive to actually carry out these attacks.
Gentlemen.
It's the United States or its allies.
Gentlemen, good to talk to all of you. I've got to wrap. I thank you very much. Borzu, Mohammed, and Jim, thanks again. After the break, it's the battle for Britain as the fight to become the UK's next Prime Minister heats up. But can a new leader deliver Brexit? 3 years ago, Britain voted to leave the European Union. Today, the country still has no real plan on how to do so. Theresa May tried, but ultimately failed, forcing her to resign. Now the race to become the new leader of the Conservative Party, and therefore the Prime Minister, is well and truly underway. And of course, at the centre of every candidate's campaign is Brexit. On Sunday, the main contenders fought it out in their first televised debate, albeit with one notable absentee. The former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson refused to take part. But he remains the favourite, and his tough stance on Brexit has appealed to many within his party. He's promised to leave the EU with or without a deal. So is he the best man to take over and deliver Brexit, whatever that means? Well, let's ask our guests. In Shropshire is Peter Wilding. He was an advisor to the former British Prime Minister David Cameron. He's the chairman of British Influence, and he's also the one who coined the phrase Brexit. Simon Richards is in Bristol. He's the CEO of the Freedom Association and co-founder of the Better Off Out campaign. And in Brussels, we have former Conservative MEP Sajjad Karim. Gentlemen, good to have you on the program. Peter Wilding, the most important question at the top of everything else before we get into anything else. Did you trademark the word?
I've always thought that would have been the best thing ever, but unfortunately, the law is you can never copyright a word.
Oh, mate.
So that's the sad truth of the matter. So I
could have
can
been
talk
rich.
about it, but not profit from it.
You could have been rich. Instead, you're stuck on my show. So sorry for you. Let me get down to business now. So Peter Wilding, Brexit sort of brought us here. Who is the best candidate to either deliver it or sort it out as we look at all these Conservative candidates?
Well, delivering it comes into two forms. First of all, there's the delivery of Brexit by simply exiting the European Union on October the 31st. That can either be in a no-deal scenario, or it can be by another device, which is essentially to leave the European Union, but to avoid economic harm, to stay in the single market and indeed the customs union for a short period of time, whilst the new government negotiates a new deal. So there are the two options available. The candidates have found themselves in a remarkable muddle, primarily because their members who will vote on the next Prime Minister are essentially Faragists. 76% of the latest opinion polls want to leave the European Union just without a deal. So we are in a battle between the pragmatic and the ideological at the moment. Now, who's going to be the best to deliver? We don't know, because it's not in Britain's gift. If we are not prepared to leave without a deal on October the 31st, then we depend upon the European Union giving us another extension to get things sorted out, which would be via a general election or a new referendum. And because the next Prime Minister needs to discuss these matters with the European Union, then really we are not, sadly and rather humiliatingly, in command of our own destiny at the moment.
Simon Richards, between the pragmatic ones and the more ideological Faragists, as we heard from the other guests, who's going to win this and whose candidate is going to be the next Prime Minister?
I think that the most pragmatic option is actually the one that Boris Johnson is taking up. And what Boris is saying is that he wants a deal. That's a deal different from the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May was trying to push through. But he does want a deal and is prepared to negotiate, obviously, with the EU on that. But that he realises that in order to get that deal, to get a deal that's fair for the country, you have to be prepared, genuinely prepared, not just saying it, you have to be genuinely prepared to walk away with no deal. And I think that's the pragmatic position, because I must say I would like him to get a deal. It obviously has to be one that will pass muster with Conservative members and voters. But that if you go in and rule out a no deal, I think that's the extreme option. If you go in and rule out a no deal, you're never going to get a decent deal.
Simon, are you maybe attributing pragmatism to his opportunism and flip-flopping over the years? Are you maybe incorrectly saying, well, maybe this guy's a pragmatist, whereas he's just in it for himself?
I think he is a pragmatist, but I also think he's genuine. It wasn't easy for Boris back in 2016 to come out for Brexit, because his father had been a member of the European Parliament. His sister is very pro-EU. So is his brother, another Tory MP. So it wasn't easy for him, and I think he was right to take some time on it. But since then, since he put his head above the parapet, and of course won that referendum against all the odds, he has actually, I think, been quite consistent. And he was trying to get a deal, but I think it was difficult for him because the Prime Minister essentially went behind his back and did a separate deal, or tried to do a separate deal with the EU. So I don't really accept that Boris is a flip-flopper.
Right.
Nobody in politics can be 100% ideologically pure.
Okay, Sajjad Karim. So Simon Richards is, in a way, giving us an explanation as to why so many members of the Conservative Party would choose Boris Johnson at this particular point in time. Do you accept and agree with that? And does that justify why he seems to be the outstanding candidate right now?
Well, I just find the whole thing actually quite farcical in so many different ways, because 3 years down the line, Britain is still navel-gazing. You have really here a candidate in Boris Johnson who all he is doing is pulling fluff out of his belly and presenting it as something new, some sort of candy floss that's going to taste sweeter this time round. It isn't. The fact of the matter is this. He is saying, I'm going to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement. Well, your negotiating partner, the European Union, is saying, no, you're not. And then he's saying, well, I'm going to put a full stop to the backstop. And your negotiating partner, the EU of 27, is saying, no, Mr. Johnson, no, you are not. So the fact is, we are still now entering a new form of ridiculousness, where this game is once again going to be played out with the British electorate, giving them false hope, false promises which simply cannot be presented. And I'm afraid come October the 31st, once again, the train is going to hit the buffers, and we are going to find ourselves in a situation of a cul-de-sac with absolutely no way out yet again, unless the European Union is then willing to throw us a further lifeline to give us another extension. But let me tell you this, I'm in Brussels at the moment, and from every single conversation I have had with very senior decision makers from right across Europe and within the EU institutions, the message is abundantly clear. If we elect Boris Johnson as leader and Prime Minister, then we can forget a further extension. That rug is going to be pulled from under our feet, and I'm afraid Boris Johnson is going to find himself staring in the face the very proposition that he is putting forward today, that I can leave without a deal. The response will be, okay, son, that's what you wanted, that's what you argued for, that's the basis upon which you won your leadership, we're going to give it to you. You are leaving without a deal.
So, Peter Wilding, this is what I don't understand. And we've known this for a while, if the Europeans are saying anyone but Boris, yet members of the Conservative Party are still probably going to go for Boris. No disrespect to the other men in the running for now, but he's the outstanding candidate. Aren't they setting the nation up for another catastrophic train wreck?
Yes, but it's not their fault. The problem with the last 3 years, and in fact, let's be frank, 40 years of British discussion about Britain's membership of the European Union, is that it's been based on fantasy for all of those decades. Britain had a leading role in the European Union, completing the single market, being the leading power, bringing in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe. But the problem was that whilst we were very successful in the European Union, the British political establishment and the British media establishment never, ever sold to the British public how Britain functioned as one of the big three in Europe. It is a disaster, and it is a fundamental failure of statecraft in the United Kingdom over these intervening period of time. So we're left where we are in your question. We're left with a public that is essentially confused, an establishment that essentially is not prepared to tell the public the truth, and you have politicians in hock with the media, which is controlled effectively by Rupert Murdoch, the Barclay brothers, who want out of the European Union, mainly for their own commercial benefit and reasons. And so you have this witch's brew in which Britain is sleepwalking to either disaster, as myself and Sarge would believe, or to liberation, a kind of millennium fantasy where we'll be out of the European Union. And what is extraordinary about this, the people that I've spoken to here in the UK, they don't appreciate that the consequences of leaving without a deal is probably the dismemberment of the United Kingdom, because Scotland and subsequently Northern Ireland want to be part of Europe, but also the collapse of the British political party system as we know it, and its potential replacement by a Farageist right and a Marxist left. I mean, this is the definition of a political, economic, social, and cultural crisis. But nobody is telling the truth. And that really is a tragedy for a country that, frankly, a lot of member states, a lot of nations respect.
Simon, it takes us back to the argument made 3 years ago, and an argument that has been made ever since then repeatedly by those who want to stay within the European Union, because they say that, well, while the vote might have been democratic, people didn't know what they were getting themselves into. Do you buy that?
I certainly don't. And the arguments that Peter and Sajid are making were arguments that we had back then. In fact, they were arguments that have been going on for about 40 years. The people did know what they were voting for. You might as well say that people don't know what they're voting for at a general election. You have to trust the people. That's what democracy is all about. And I don't accept this idea that we're heading for ruin outside the European Union. And of course, we're not leaving Europe. We remain involved in almost all the European institutions and world institutions. But we only want to be like the majority of other countries in the world, free to make our own decisions.
Okay, but nobody's disputing that, Simon. I'm sorry to interrupt you, and I don't want this to sound as if we're ganging up on you here, right? But I mean, when you hear from someone like Peter saying that there will be the dismemberment of the UK if there's no deal and there's the crashing out of Europe. Boris Johnson says he wants to get rid of the Irish backstop. The Europeans might not want to negotiate any of that. If the Irish backstop goes away and there's a hard border, for example, trouble in Northern Ireland, or the troubles in Northern Ireland could kick off again, you can foresee all of this happening, right? I mean, yes, it's your right to decide what you want to do, but these are very tangible, real things that are right around the corner. Do you accept that?
I do, but what you need is somebody who actually believes in Brexit. The problem there's been so far is that Theresa May didn't believe in Brexit. She saw it as damage limitation, and therefore she never put the positive case for it. Now, I happen to be Welsh. The majority of people in Wales voted for Brexit. We voted, in fact, as a United Kingdom. The largest party in Northern Ireland, the DUP, is strongly in favour of Brexit. And people in Scotland also understand that they can't become an independent country. Spain and other countries would veto it. I think the problem is that people have seen Brexit in such a negative way, because contrary to the idea that the press is all pro-Brexit, the majority aren't. The Daily Mail, for example, has turned very much against Brexit. The fact is that people want to control their own lives, and it's incredibly patronising to say all the time that people didn't know what they were voting for. They knew perfectly well what they were voting for. The problem is they've been denied it ever since.
Let's go to the man who lost his seat recently in Brussels as an MEP, Sajjad Karim. You had an interesting reaction when Simon said we need a true believer in Brexit, and Theresa May was not a true believer. Tell me why.
I mean, I just find the whole thing absolutely fantastical. And it just reminded me of the 5 candidates in their Channel 4 debate. I think it was yesterday or the day before. And Rory Stewart, one of the candidates, gave the example that his wife had asked him to go and take the rubbish outside and put it in the bin. There was far more rubbish than the bin space available, but he said, I was trying to convince myself, believe in the bin, believe in the bin. But you know what? The rubbish still wouldn't fit in the bin. This is not a question of if you believe the parameters of the reality of what you are dealing with is going to change. It isn't. The negotiating parameters remain exactly what they are. They are very tightly legally defined. And this is the one mistake I think many, many people make, and this comes through from those that supported Brexit. They think this is almost a negotiation between 2 countries where absolutely everything can change. It isn't. This is a negotiation between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And the European Union is a rules-based organisation which has to negotiate in accordance with the parameters of those rules. Those cannot change. It's not like a government that can automatically say, right, okay, well, we're going to do it this way, we're going to change that. It can't do it. The parameters are set, and that's what you have got to work in. So this idea
but isn't that one of the reasons why people voted for Brexit? Sorry to interrupt you, Sajjad. One of the reasons why people voted for Brexit was because they didn't like this idea of this bureaucracy in Brussels where they say, oh my God, these are the rules and these are decided and we don't have any flexibility. Isn't that a part of the reason why so many Britons decided they want to opt out?
I think that's a big part of the misunderstanding that had been presented to the British people, because the fact of the matter is this, that we are a part of this organisation. We are a part of the rules-making processes and procedures, and a very influential part of that. The vast majority of what actually happens here that concerns us goes our way, but the British people have never been informed this. And it is the same with every international institution that you may deal with, whether it's the WTO, whether it's NATO, whether it's the United Nations. And therefore, to take the logical steps is the next step then to move one step away from our involvement in those organisations. There are many people who are today beginning to advocate exactly that. Where does that leave United Kingdom standing genuinely then as an island alone? I don't see how that works in the modern world. It simply doesn't.
Simon Richards, has Sajjad Karim managed to convince you at all?
He hasn't. And I have to say, I can understand him being a bit bitter about it. You know, he's lost his job as a result of this. I probably feel the same.
Oh,
but,
come on. There's no need for that sort of... There's no need for that sort of personal attack, please. Stick to the issues that I've raised.
Well, it's
this
just
is not about personalities. I haven't attacked your person. I've attacked your arguments. Please deal with the arguments that I've presented.
I'm not attacking his personality, I'm just stating a fact. The fact is that most of the British people do not benefit from membership of the European Union. And they've had plenty of time to consider that. They are not anti-international involvement.
Simply not true.
We're in favour of being involved in Europe and the world.
That statement means actually nothing.
Okay.
That statement that has just been presented is, one, factually untrue.
Okay, and this is...
secondly, it actually means nothing.
Okay, and the two of you are clearly on opposite ends with regards to Brexit. I want to circle it all the way back to this race. So, Peter Wilding, there's a process of elimination, there's going to be some culling, and eventually there'll be a new Conservative Party leader who will be the Prime Minister. Can we say with confidence that none of these others, the Rory Stewarts, the Sajid Javids, Dominic Raabs, Michael Goves, none of them stand a chance against Boris? Can we say that confidently?
No. As the phrase goes, the only person who can lose this election is Boris Johnson himself. given his track record of indiscretions, gaffes, etc. I think the odds are that he will win because he is the favourite of the Conservative establishment as well as the Conservative members. However, Rory Stewart does have a very attractive alternative offer. My view is I don't see him getting into the last two. And so it's Boris's to lose. But even if he wins, unless he has a kind of 100-day plan in which he resolves the Brexit question by getting out, I think the real thing, tragically, in fact, the political poison can be taken out if Britain leaves. I don't think it's right for the country, but I think most Brits don't care about the single market, the customs union, etc. Sadly, what they care about is just getting out. And I think his determination will be to achieve that. What he will seek to do is probably this, is that he will place a high Brexiteer, somebody like Dominic Raab, in charge of the trade negotiations which might follow, and try and change the narrative to a kind of Churchillian blood, toil, sweat and tears, we Brits can do this, Shakespearean sceptred isle type of narrative, and potentially call a general election. A general election which, frankly, he will be up against a septuagenarian Marxist. And frankly, that is the kind of battle that anybody would like. So it depends how creative Boris Johnson and his acolytes are. If he's not creative, the chances of Boris Johnson's premiership collapsing in destruction quickly are very high. The chances of a national government are quite high. People don't realize that we're reaching the end game now, and we're a matter of 3 months away from what could be the biggest political crisis in Britain since 1931.
Right. Sajjad Karim, very finally, a lot of people asking whether the Tories self-destructing in many ways over the past few months played into the hands of Labour, but Peter Wilding's suggestion that Boris could actually create a national momentum leading up to a general election, where he's up against a Jeremy Corbyn who Peter described in not very flattering terms. Does the Tory party still have that confidence that they could defeat Labour and Jeremy Corbyn, and Jeremy Corbyn's just a septuagenarian Marxist, as he put it, if it comes to a general election? Or is maybe Peter Wilding underestimating Corbyn and the left?
Well, I say to you this as a committed Conservative. Once again, the hand of history is actually placing itself on the shoulder of the Conservative Party. And the fact that the Conservative Party seems intent on pressing the self-destruct button, the natural consequence of that is not going to be anything good for the unity of the United Kingdom itself. Now, this goes fundamentally against the grain of everything that it means to be conservative. And therefore, at this moment in time, more than you really do have to go back several decades before you arrive at a similar point. We are once again at an absolutely pivotal moment. And depending upon the direction that the United Kingdom chooses to take through the decision as to who is to be the next leader of the Conservative Party, that is going to determine what sort of United Kingdom is going to emerge come October the 31st. We really are, as Peter quite rightly said, now in the absolute end game. This is eyeball-to-eyeball stuff now. And what comes out of this is going to really set in train whether there is a United Kingdom, if there is a United Kingdom, what type of United Kingdom it is, what political structures we have, what constitutional order we are going to have, and indeed, what sort of political makeup is going to exist in the constituent parts of the United Kingdom will determine exactly what sort of society we are to be. I'm very fearful that I don't see any of this ending well if we carry on the trajectory that we are currently seeming to still be chasing after, something that doesn't exist in reality.
This won't end well, says Sajjad Karim. Final word to Simon Richards. Simon, absolute endgame, are the stakes that high?
We're certainly entering very choppy waters. I agree with the other two people about that. But I think this is about hope versus fear. I have a great belief in this country, and I believe Boris Johnson has. And there's been a real issue of trust because the referendum has not been put in place, it has not been enacted. And until we get rid of that issue of mistrust of politicians, we're not going to get far. But I really believe that Britain has a very bright Brexit future, and a future that is all about engaging with Europe and with the rest of the world.
Simon Richards, Sajjad Karim and Peter Wilding, pleasure having you all on The Newsmakers.
אנחנו עושים צעד חשוב לקראת עלייתו על הקרקע של היישוב רמת טראמפ. הוא נושא בגאון את שמו של ידיד גדול מאוד של מדינת ישראל, אני גם מאוד גאה לומר ידיד גדול שלי, נשיא ארצות הברית דונלד טראמפ.
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Mali's president warns that ethnic violence could cause his country to collapse. Does the government have the political might or willpower to stop the bloodshed? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.